Now, without further ado, I want to welcome the panelists today, as well as our moderator. Our moderator, Kent Bracken, works for Capgemini Industries, Capgemini Energy, that is, based in Chicago. Kent is a graduate from Utah State University. He then went on to receive a Master's of Science in Management at Northwestern University. We're really excited to have Kent today. We're also going to have as panelist Angela Redding. Angela Redding received her bachelor's and master's of political science here at Utah State University and graduated summa cum laude as well. Really proud of all the effort that she's done there. She is the Director of Brand Strategy and Business Communications for Bonneville Communications. However, as a creative organization, they don't use titles. So I guess you probably won't use that very often. She doesn't either. Fun fact for her, she's actually never applied for a job. So we all aspire to be you, Angela, and never need that. We'd also like to introduce Andrew Croshaw. Andrew Croshaw was recently appointed CEO of Levitt Partners in April of 2017. He was actually with Levitt Partners from its inception in 2009. He is the father of 5, and his family is actually with him today, so we'd like to welcome them as well. So without further ado, Kent Bracken.
I guess we're all supposed to be up here. Lovely weather. I was packing to come to Cache Valley, and I was expecting the kind of weather you've had all summer, but this is a real change in temperature. But this is typical for September, I guess. But I understand it's getting better when I leave. So next week it should warm up a little bit. So happy to be here. One correction, Capgemini is a consulting firm, so we do energy consulting, but it's really Capgemini Consulting, French-based company. They bought the Ernst & Young consulting practice in 2000, so it's really the new evolution of Capgemini Consulting, but Ernst & Young Consulting. So I don't know how much facilitation I need. These folks seem like they've pretty well geared up to answer any questions you've got. So what we wanted to do is spend a few minutes with introductions, and I think talk through a little bit about how each of us, a little bit different career paths to get where we are. Talk through how we got to from where you're sitting now to where we are, what those experiences have been like, and then maybe to give you a little bit of a feel for what a day in the life might be. I know when I was looking at jobs, I had no idea what I'd actually be doing once I left the classroom. So to give you a little bit of a flavor for that and how we got started. So if we could start with that, I guess since I've been talking already, Angela, if we start with you on how you got to where you are and what a day in the life might look like.
Sure. Is this working? You can hear me okay? So I'll start out by saying that I never really thought that I'd be in the place that I am now. I'm sure all of us would say that. You start out in school and you have these ideas of what you think impressive looks like. And so I started out as a molecular biology major, and I thought smart people do science, so I better do something impressive. And turned out that I like people more than bacteria, and I talked to myself too much in the lab. So I switched over to PR for a little bit, and thought, well, I really like political science and I like public relations, I think, but PR sounds like where you could get a job, and nobody knows what poli-sci majors do in their life and if there's any money that follows, so I don't know if that's a good decision. And I started to take some poli-sci classes, though, and I loved them. And I looked at the list of all the requirements, and I loved all of those. And I had a class with Mike Lyons and Randy Simmons and Chris Fossen, and suddenly I was learning how to think, how to articulate those thoughts, how to defend a position, how to problem solve, how to think of mental models, and that gave me a place to say, this is how my brain works, and I want my brain to work even better. So I'm going to invest in political science. And I did that and took some econ classes, take more econ classes. I wish I took more. And that turned into a master's degree as well. And then when I came out of school, I had a fantastic opportunity that Randy and Chris gave me to speak at an economic conference, and I presented some of my master's thesis research, and it turned into something more along the lines of performance management. And the Koch Foundation, and Ryan Stowers, another alum here, was there, and they hired me out into DC to do some consulting for them. And we did some vision development and performance management kind of things, and that parlayed into a New York stint where I circled back to PR and did some crisis communications there, some consulting for other kinds of companies. And one thing led to another. And every time that I had a new job opportunity, it wasn't because I was looking, but it was because there was this fantastic opportunity in many ways to start over, but most importantly, to learn something entirely new. So I did crisis comms for a little while. I started my own consulting gig for a little bit, and that has pros and cons. We can talk about that later. Consulted for some nonprofit organizations and Big Circle and some startups, and invested in some media companies, and then now I'm here in Salt Lake working for a creative agency. And I think the term consulting can either mean you're on your own and you're working for yourself. It can mean you're in a consulting firm. It can mean that you're in any kind of services agency where you're consulting for businesses or people, and that's what I'm doing now on the marketing side. So we do TV campaigns and websites and apps and a lot of digital marketing, but from a marketing lens, we help impact what those strategic decisions are for the business. So a day in the life is lots of meetings with clients, lots of internal meetings with creatives, who's a little bit half babysitting, half driving to get the deliverables out the door. It's, it goes from sending a gajillion emails and responding to those, to writing new business proposals, to trying to come up with the right channel mix. Are we doing enough in social media? Are we doing enough in display media? Should we be doing more on email? What do those emails look like? What are the objectives? Who is our audience? What does this brand really need to do for that audience? So lots of strategic decisions that you kind of do all day, and then ultimately the client tells you whether they agree with you or not. So it's a lot about building trust and helping them understand the mental models you're using in order to connect their brand with their customer.
Andrew.
Yes, Angela, I could listen to you all day. You're very, very interesting. Let me just first say, Angela and I just discovered a long connection that we had. We bought a 1976 Toyota when my family lived in South Carolina when I was growing up, and we brought that car to Utah with us when we moved. And I drove that car through high school, and I loved that car. We called it the Crafty Lady. And then at some point, when I think I may have left the house, Angela got that car, and she drove the Crafty Lady for years.
I did.
So we're practically related.
Yeah.
We have a shared heritage. We just figured that out moments ago. So first of all, thanks for having us here today. Angela, maybe this is the way you feel too, but I came here to help you. That's my main objective here, is to be helpful to you. I think back to my time in college and how much I understood about careers and opportunities, and frankly, it was very little. It was all amorphous, and it was kind of exciting, but I really had no clue. So the fact that you would make time on a Friday morning to come here and learn and prepare yourself speaks a lot about you, and I hope you'll take advantage of us, because we want you to benefit from this. So a little bit about Levitt Partners. Levitt Partners is a healthcare-focused consulting firm. And in consulting, there are different sort of strains of consulting. Some consulting is focused on management and strategy, and some consulting is focused on implementation. So big, lots of boots on the ground deployed at client sites, getting projects implemented. We're more of the former. We're more of the management and strategy consulting. And within that, we're an even smaller niche. We are healthcare intelligence. We are gathering data, performing analytics, and answering questions for clients, which doesn't even quite get to setting their strategy, although we do get tugged into that a little bit. So we're fairly niche-y, but a lot of consulting is niche-y, and you'll I think learn that today as you hear about our experiences. So so to respond to your question, Kent, about how I ended up here. If you feel totally clueless about where you're going to end up, then you're probably like most people, and that's the way I was. As I think back to how I got to where I am, it's that I was involved in student activities at Utah State, student government, and that led me to meet some members of the Board of Trustees at this school. And that connection with the Board of Trustees got me introduced to the then governor of the state, Mike Leavitt, and Mike Leavitt is the Leavitt and Leavitt Partners. So relationships end up opening doors and creating opportunities that you maybe wouldn't anticipate in the future, and that's my story for sure, and we can talk more about that later.
Okay. Also thrilled to be here. My family's still in Logan. I've lived in Chicago for 40 years, but love coming back. I make it here several times a year, and like Andrew, it's a thrill for me to try and give you some perspective on what consulting's all about. I also, when I was in school, really didn't know where I would end up or what I wanted to do. I just knew what I kind of liked doing. I liked finance. I minored in computer science. I didn't really see any good job possibilities as a senior. I still wanted to go to graduate school, so I went to Northwestern, which is now Kellogg, for graduate school. And the semester after I started, they started a new focus on management information systems, which for me was the perfect blend of business and systems. And that led me to a systems analyst job. My first job out of college was with Arthur Andersen, which was still in business at that time. I guess they're back now. And then Andersen Consulting, loved that. I loved the variety. I mean, when you hear about consulting, you hear all of the the pluses about the variety with different clients and different the travel opportunities and different things like that. And that's all very true. There's two sides to that coin. And that's something we can talk about in a few minutes in a day in the life. So that I was with Andersen for 6 years, and then with Baxter Healthcare for another 6 years. I wanted to take what I'd learned in consulting initially as like an entry-level analyst and put that to work with a real company and guide a system through from beginning to end, which is a real thrill for me. But I found after a few years I was still working with the same systems and not really, I felt like I was growing. So I had an opportunity to go with Ernst & Young Consulting at that time, which I loved, and then they were acquired by Capgemini in 2000. So it's just kind of an evolution. I think you start doing what you like and what you're able to do well as an entry-level consultant, and then that takes you, I think, as we've heard already this morning, to places where you have a passion, where you have a connection, where you have a skill, and it could be in any different industries. I've worked in manufacturing, retail, the CDC for a small stretch. We can talk about that with manufacturing utilities. So a huge amount of variety. So the variety part of the consulting side is still very much there. So that's about all in terms of an introduction. For a day in the life, let me start that and then maybe go. It's a little bit hard to give a day in the life after you've been doing this. For me, it's been 35 years, so, or 40 almost. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different than what you could expect on a daily basis. But I think from a general standpoint, more and more, if you do end up with more technically oriented consulting, you're going to find that your project teams are very distributed. And by that I mean you've got team members in China or India, you've got team members in New York and Los Angeles and Salt Lake and Chicago and Europe, and you're trying to collaborate. They all have different specific responsibilities, but you still have to work with them. So most recently, my project team, about 2/3 of us were located in India, and 2 or 3 others in Phoenix, and then about the other third in Chicago. So I had early morning, I'm catching up on emails that were coming in from India overnight with problems that they were supporting, issues with different projects and support issues. You've got meetings with clients to try and work through what's on their plate for that day or issues. And then there's team members. As you start to get into more of project management, you're guiding your team with helping them make their decisions and guide them through issues and help figuring out what they need to communicate to clients. So it's a lot of it is Communication, I try and stay away from spending too much time on your emails and start spending more time as much as possible face-to-face with clients. So you try and force yourself to spend more of that face-to-face time. In terms of some of the other things I think we wanted to talk about, in terms of skills, I think, Angela, go back to you. What are some of the skills, both technical and soft skills, that the students can be building right now that would help them be successful with consulting the way you see it today?
It's probably not the skills that you think. So many skills you learn by doing, not just by studying. So the things that, particularly when I look at hiring or when I think someone has found my value worthwhile, it's because I know how to talk about that value. So primarily learn how to articulate what you're doing, why you're doing it, what problem you're solving, and to be able to make a reasonable argument about that thinking process. Taking that outside of your head and turning it external, that's huge. Communication, like you were saying, Kent, is absolutely essential. Problem solving would be number 2, and it doesn't matter the problem. I mean, schools aren't always set up to help you really problem solve as much as they are to memorize and regurgitate. So if you have opportunities to take a test that's an essay rather than a multiple choice, revel in that, because that's the kind of learning that you're going to apply every single day. So communication, problem solving, can we go down the buzzword list? Empathy. You need to be able to put yourself into someone else's position, whether that's your client, whether that's a customer, whether that's somebody you're trying to coach as an employee, whoever that is. If you only can look at a problem from your perspective, you're going to leave a lot of value on the table. And that's a cultivated skill. I mean, you can say you have it or you don't, but if you just try to understand what somebody else is thinking, or what am I missing, or what is my current frame and perspective, and what barriers does that provide for me that doesn't allow me to look at this differently? Maybe just being here in this beautiful Cache Valley place. I mean, you have so many advantages being able to be here. What if you were in a crowded city with millions of people and you didn't have trees all around you? I mean, it sounds so simple, but the truth is that is a different perspective. You think about guns differently, depending on that worldview. You think about what your everyday problems are. So being able to put yourself in someone else's position, communication, problem solving, and research. I think one of the best gifts you can kind of teach yourself is how to find information. I was talking to one of our strategists the other day, and he said, we were trying to solve a problem, and he said, who would write the book about this? And if we can't find that person, let's read the book. But if we can't find the person, let's hire them so that they can solve it. And the last thing I would say is, we were just talking about this with Derek. Was it Derek outside? When you figure out that you don't have to be the one to do the work, you have to be the one to solve the problem, it's very freeing, because then suddenly your choice set of who solves that problem for you and with you grows exponentially, and your ability to think outside of the box grows exponentially. So if I have a consulting task and I think I have to do all of the work, do all of the research, I have to take all of my personal skill set, and that's the only way I can solve this problem, it's limiting. But if you can think about who would write the book, who's the expert that I can leverage, who's somebody that I can delegate tasks that I don't do very efficiently or well so that I can narrow my focus on the stuff I do well, opens up your ability to solve problems even more. Those are just a few.
Andrew, same question.
Yes, a lot of similar themes, I think, despite the fact that we work in different environments, similar themes. So maybe I'll just pick a different part to talk about, which is in our firm, we have people who focus on research and policy, and being able to know how to find information and how to understand that information and then apply it to a problem is really valuable for those people. And we have people that have undergraduate degrees in a whole range of things, but they may have master's degrees in public health or in public administration or in English, because writing is really important for those people. Then we have people who are more on the quantitative side of our business, people who are math and those people are working with data sets, and they are trying to normalize and bring different data sets in and make them comparable and then draw insights out of that. And those people don't even really know healthcare. They just know the function of data analytics really well. And so they work with other members of a team who can look at the numbers with them, and together they draw out meaning and answer questions for clients. And then we're a small company, 130 people, 3 offices, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Salt Lake City. And we now, just in the last 2 years, we now actually have salespeople at our company. And so if you're a salesperson, you're very much in the relationship business, and you have to be an excellent listener. Why do you have to be such a good listener? Because in order to know what to sell people, you have to really understand what their problems are. And one of the mistakes that we all make in any industry is that we try and sell people what we have, instead of listening to their problem and understanding what they want to solve, and then being able to talk about your solutions in the context of the problem that they have. So being a good listener becomes incredibly important.
Excellent point. I saw a thought over the Labor Day weekend that said if the only tool you have is a hammer, all of your problems start to look like nails. And if we're all technology focused and your way of solving problem is to develop a program or develop an application or software, you're missing the nuances. And so I think just like Angela was saying and Andrew, listening to your clients, understanding where they're coming from, what their problems are. And we all have I was talking with Chris earlier, subconscious biases. And one of the biases we have is to look at problems in terms of our experience with them, and to take what people are telling us and try and relate it to what your own experience is. So it's an unconscious bias to not broaden our perspective and look at problems from other people's viewpoint. And we need to be aware of that. So listening is really key. The other thing, leveraging off of Angela's comment on working with a team, I do mock interviews at Northwestern to try and coach students on interviewing skills. And one of the things that you'll be asked most likely is, what's your experience in working with teams and working with other people? Because there's an opportunity within technology to be very focused on doing it all yourself and figuring it all out yourself. And yet, in the real world, you have your own responsibilities, but you have to be really good at teamwork, working with other people, even people or clients that you may not get along with. So they'll ask you questions about your experiences with project teams, team members that you didn't get along with, how you made that work. And the focus is all to see how you're going to deal with that situation in a consulting environment. I've never had a consulting assignment where it's been me. Occasionally you'll get an assignment where you have to go do some research, and you have to do that. But even then you have to be able to leverage the other tools and people around you. So from that standpoint, being a student is some of the best preparation you can have for being a consultant. You're changing classes every semester. We're changing clients on a regular basis. Some clients you have year after year, but a lot of times you're coming up to speed with new clients every few months. They all have different problems. You've got to learn how to go research those to try and figure out what the current trends are, what other companies are doing. So this rigor as a student is something that will really serve you well if you want to move into consulting.
Kent, I'd like to just ask the audience a question while you're looking with it. Is that okay?
Yep.
So just by raise of hands, how many of you have a grade in one of your classes that's dependent upon working with a team? Okay. That is consulting right there. Like, your grade is dependent upon the team, not your individual performance. So if you're having those experiences, then that's real life for a lot of jobs, and especially in the consulting industry.
So something from a general standpoint, and Andrew, since you both got mics, since you got the mic right now, what did you find in consulting that was more exciting or more than you expected, and something that was more of a challenge and something you may not have expected?
So I never wanted to be a consultant. In fact, when I went to get an MBA and had an opportunity to interview with different companies, I chose not to interview with consulting firms because I didn't feel like the quality of life that they offered was going to be compatible with my goals. And so it's funny that here I am in the industry. So that was a misperception on my part. There are some consulting firms out there whose model depends on burning up young people and giving them great experience, but working them to death, and then those kids move on to other opportunities in life and are benefited from the experience, but they paid a dear price. That isn't how all consulting firms work. It's not how our consulting firm works. So that was a misperception for me. What I have really enjoyed about consulting is that in the case of our company, we're very mission driven. So I could talk for a long time and you'd all hate it about why healthcare has to change. But our mission is to advance value in healthcare, paying for it differently, consuming less of it, getting our country back on a sustainable fiscal path. So I love the consulting work that we do because it's helping, in a small way, bring about that better outcome for our country. So it's really fun. Now, anytime you're in a customer, if it weren't for customers, businesses would be great, right? Serving customers is not easy, and it takes time, and sometimes they have unrealistic demands. And that's the hard part of consulting, but frankly, I'm not sure that there are too many businesses where you can get away from that. You got to make the customers happy, and that's just part of it. And some people that tend to not have the patience for that or not have the disposition for it, they can still make contributions in other ways, sort of more behind the scenes. I talked about some of those jobs earlier, some of the data and analytics jobs, some of the core functional operations job within the company. They still power our company and move us forward, but they're not interacting with clients.
Angela, pros and cons that you've discovered.
So this makes me think of, my husband and I love backpacking. We love hiking. And last weekend we went up to Jackson. We do this, crazy, work is insane. We've got 20 minutes, throw everything in the Jeep. We're going to go sleep in the Jeep with our sleeping bags, and we're going to go do a 20-mile hike to Lake Solitude. And we do this every year. And we woke up to snow. And so my husband tells me, well, 20 miles, we've done this before. Maybe that's a little too far if it's going to be socked in. We won't see the Grand. And so he's like, I know this trail that's not Cascade Canyon, but it's just to the right of it. He's in the back right there laughing because he did this to me. Just remember this. So the trail is, he's like, I remember it being kind of steep. I think there's a climber's trail. It's mostly bushwhacking. Maybe it's flat for 2 miles, and then we go up, but it's only like 1.5 miles. So 8 hours later, 3,000 feet of elevation gain, 3 trails that didn't turn into anything but boulders. Finally, we find this climber's trail, and it's really more of the cascade of the creek. And as I was doing that, I was actually thinking about this forum and thinking, consulting by yourself is kind of like that. So my consulting has been just a little bit different from being in a firm. It's been more on my own. And in some ways, when you do it by yourself, you don't know what you don't know. And it's a lot easier to follow somebody else's path than it is to go try to find this obscure climber's trail, or a deer trail, which I think we were mostly on, or a bear trail, which also was part of it. But we did find huckleberries and filled a whole Nalgene, and those are amazing. So I felt like this is an analogy to when you go out on your own. Sometimes there are huckleberries and it's rewarding, and sometimes there are just more boulders covered in snow, slippery, trying not to break your ankle, and there's a lot of adventure and fun in that. But it's also really hard. And I had times where I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I think I'm a fraud. I'm not even sure that I'm creating any value. And I was listening to this podcast the other day. I love the Stanford ETL podcast. And this was an oldie. I think it was 2013. Tim O'Reilly said, create more value than you capture. And I loved that as I think he has a book even. I haven't read the book. But I loved that idea. Your value is on the line when you're the consultant. They are judging the quality of your work And that quality of work is you. That's one of those especially challenging things for our creatives. They put their whole vulnerability out there when they design something, and their artistic vulnerability is out there, but you're doing the same thing for consulting. So that was something I hadn't quite anticipated. And now being inside an agency and having had a few other experiences with other teams, I feel like my learning has skyrocketed. Because again, I didn't know what I didn't know. I've never been one to really fake it until I make it. I'm willing to say that I don't know the answer. That's not always valued. But I don't feel like you can learn if you pretend you already do know the answer. So having the humility and vulnerability to be wrong, and being willing to just keep pushing forward even if you don't really know, those were challenges. The benefits, though, are having great mentors. So the more mentors and more people that you can surround yourself with, and I have, having consulted across the whole country, which I'm sure is true for both of you, you meet the most incredible people who make you want to be better and who change how you think about the world and who add value to you constantly by those interactions. So super rewarding, hucks on the trail, lots of boulders and minefields. That's how I would summarize it.
I had a direction I was going to go, but I'm going to change a little
Sorry,
bit.
I took us way down.
No, that's wonderful. Because when you're in the room as a consultant, first of all, they look at you. So you want to make sure that your appearance isn't going to detract for your message. So number one, you've got to be professional. Number two, they do look at you for either having the answers or knowing where to get them. A lot of times they're trying to solve business problems that they don't know how to solve them, or they wouldn't have called in consultants to come and do it for them. So you need to be prepared. You need to study their problems to participate. You can't really sit in the room and just, you need to listen, but you need to actively participate in the discussion. So if you feel a little bit you're not really self-confident in a lot of situations, we're all end up in situations like that, you at least have to be actively engaged and participate. So come out of your shell if those of you are a little bit shy, and you really have to engage your customers, your clients, and participate. Where was I going to? Oh, so consulting. So the two sides of the coin. You do get a lot of travel. It could be my first few years were exciting places like Mattoon, Illinois, and Keokuk, Iowa. The only place to stay is the hunting lodge that's owned by the company, and you're 100-mile drive from the closest airport, and there's only one restaurant in town. Or the last few places I spent 3 years at a time in. Not really a wonderful place, Indianapolis or Paramus, New Jersey, or Pittsburgh. So there's a lot of travel. But most consulting companies now, they realize this work-life balance is very important to keeping people. Most companies are trying to keep you for a long period of time, so they want to make it a workable life. So you would find most consulting companies would have you be on site with a client Monday through Thursday. So you're staying at a hotel Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights, and then you're home with your family on Fridays, still working for the client, but we're all connected now, so you can work from home or from your home office. So with all that travel, I was almost always home on the weekends. You may be still doing some work on the weekends, but at least you're not on the road. The other side of that is, especially if you're working with a global company or even a local company with a global client, you could end up with international opportunities. I certainly wasn't looking for it. We were doing a large project with Limited Brands based in Columbus, Ohio. They sell clothes, a retailer. But with our project was so big to reinvent their back office systems, we had at one point 200 developers in India. And it just gets really difficult to manage and coordinate teams of that size. And it got to a point where we needed to have one of our managers in India. We already had 2 or 3 Indian managers in the States. So they asked me if I'd be willing to go to India for a couple of months. So you have to be flexible. With consulting, you've got to be willing within limits to go pretty much anywhere the clients have a need. So I said, sure, I'll go to India for a couple of months. It turned out to be a year. Which actually was a fantastic experience. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it turned out to be one of the greatest experiences of my life, both personally as well as professionally. So you've got to be flexible and expect opportunities where they may not be readily apparent. And also, as Andrew was saying, solving problems. Again, they're calling you in because they've got a problem they don't know how to solve. And hopefully you're working with a company or with partners or with a team that can put your heads together and work out a resolution. This could be as simple as my last client who couldn't figure out how to copy and paste data from a report from their bank more effectively into their system. I said, you don't need to copy and paste at all. You got electronic data transfer. These people can all do more important things than copy and pasting all day. To where a lot of you probably may have been born in 2001, but not really remembering all of the fears in the country after the. Oh, okay. We'll move on to questions in just a minute. With after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, but one of the real fears was bioterrorism, that terrorists could get access to a smallpox vaccine, smallpox, and release it. So the CDC was really concerned that they didn't have a good nationwide response process in place to this. So you wouldn't necessarily think of calling Capgemini to put together that. But it wasn't a matter we had the answer, it was we knew how to help them get to the answer. We did several facilitated sessions. The name of the Centers for Disease Control is Centers. It's several centers. They don't always talk together, collaborate really well. And we really helped. They had an Office of Terrorism Preparedness and Response put together guidance for the states on how to respond and how to prepare for a bioterrorism threat. So you can really start to see where, as a consultant, even if it's something outside of your core skill set, you can really start to help businesses make a difference. We wanted to open it up for questions for about another 15 to 20 minutes. If you want to direct your questions to one of the three of us, we'd be happy to look at what's on your mind and help as much as we can. And we got a microphone passing around here if you want to raise a hand, and we'll get that to you.
Yeah, appreciate you guys being here. Andrew, you talked about thinking consulting didn't have the certain lifestyle that you were thinking about. What was the lifestyle that you were thinking, but more so, what is it now, and how does that help you with your family life?
Thank you for asking. That gives me a chance to say a little bit more about that, and that's an important topic. I think that my generalization about consulting was inaccurate, but my perception was accurate about some types of consulting. So there are some types of consulting jobs where you fly out Sunday night or Monday morning, and you are off at a client site till Thursday night, and you fly back that night, and you generally work from home Friday, and then you have the weekend, and then you repeat. While you're while you're traveling, you're probably working 10 or 12 hours a day because you don't clock out at dinner time. That's the kind of consulting that wasn't a good fit for me. You learn a ton doing that kind of consulting. You get paid really well. So for some people, it's a fine trade-off. You just have to kind of have eyes open about it. The whole topic makes me emotional. I'm sorry. But there are other kinds of consulting too. And our model is one where we don't travel to the client site to do our work. We travel to the client site to sell, and we travel to the client site to deliver the final evaluation. But otherwise, we are working in our offices, and we're doing the analytics, and we're conducting interviews, and we're doing things like that. And that's going to put you more in the 45 to 50 hours a week, kind of. And now you still make a great wage because it's a job that really draws upon your strengths, and you got to be committed, and you got to be a hard worker. But it's a different kind of consulting. So I still contend that that as long as you understand the trade-offs, it can be a great career choice. And I had a professor in business school, and this will be my last comment, a professor in business school that said, look at the areas of change out in industries, and where you see change, there's opportunity for you. Now, as young people coming out of college, if you join an industry that is fairly stagnant and that hasn't changed for a long time, then the likelihood is that you're going to have a slow progression in your leadership opportunities, in your advancement. But if you find an industry that's going through change, all of the assumptions about how that industry works and all of the experiences that have been built up by the old dogs, the veterans, are not that useful. And so you can come in and very quickly know as much as anybody about what's going on in that industry. And whether you're a consultant or an innovator, you can really advance. So what industries are changing right now? Healthcare is changing a lot. Education is changing a lot. Energy is changing a lot. And technology, of course, has always been a real high change. There are others. But if you're thinking about, like, where am I going to go for industries and do I want to be a consultant, I would think about that too.
Can I add one extra thing to that? I love everything you said, and that's exactly my experience too. I think it's also a matter of time and season. So sometimes having the 2 years in New York where you're insanely busy, learning like crazy, is right for a short period of time to jumpstart you into something where you actually can deserve a quality of life in some way. And deserve is probably the wrong word. It's more like you've earned, yeah, that's probably a better word, where you have all this qualification and now you can create just as much value but in a shorter amount of time. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. So it doesn't mean it's not always the right thing, and I love how you framed that. But it also doesn't mean that you have to do that. There are plenty of job opportunities recognizing that there are trade-offs. When you work 60 hours, you're getting 50% more experience, right? So I completely agree with what you said there, Andrew.
How's it going? I'm Chris Marino, and I have a question for Angela. So who's your favorite client to work with, and then what's your favorite project to work with, and why?
Every client's my favorite. Isn't that what you tell them? I like products. I like to work on products that I get really passionate about. I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he said, you're a passionate person. If you're not passionate, you're not going to be successful. So to me, it's about, do I see a product market fit? Do I see an opportunity to really inspire the customer to buy that product, let's say? Right now, I'm working on, this is a new client for us, Harvest Right. They've invented a home freeze dryer. Brand new category. Never existed before. Freeze dryers used to be $50,000 plus. They have a scientific freeze dryer. They're poised to revolutionize how that works in the lab, and you can freeze dry your own food at home. It's a challenge, though, because why in the world do you want a home freeze dryer for $3,000? Right? You don't see the need. So what I like about it is that they're inventors. They're thinking creatively. There's an opportunity to entirely revolutionize and define a category of business. I love that. And I love that it's a huge problem to solve. So those are the kinds of projects that I like to work on. The challenge is a startup. And they've been making money. They've been covering their costs. The economy makes one turn, they make one different business decision, they make a bet that's not right, and suddenly everybody's stressed out because the revenue's not coming in like you expected. And what gets cut first? Consultants. Marketing in particular. Although it's a little bit of a misnomer, you can't drive customers if you don't have marketing and they don't know about you. But those are kind of the pros and cons. But I love a really tough challenge. And the other thing I love is when I have a fantastic team to work with. That makes all of the difference. I could sell dog food, and if I have brilliant, fun, interesting people to work with who are committed to waking up in the morning thinking about dog food, then I'm going to be stoked about it too. Apparently that wasn't a good answer because we're losing people. Just teasing.
I believe we have class starting.
Thank you. This one's for Mr. Croshaw. You mentioned that healthcare is changing. How does the healthcare issue in politics affect you and your business, if at all?
Thank you. Great question. It affects us dramatically because some of the trend and industry analysis that we do is political and policy. So we are watching very closely what's happening in Congress, and we're watching very closely what's happening in the administration, so that the agencies and departments that fall under the president. And the changes that, healthcare is a fairly regulated industry, so the changes that they make has a shutter effect that goes through the industry. And a lot of companies want to understand, how did that policy change, or how will that law affect my relationships with my customers, and how does it affect my revenue? And so we help them answer those questions. So yeah, we're tracking that stuff regularly. In fact, one of the new products that we launched this year was something we call DC Pulse. So once a week, our clients, for $3,000 a month, can get on the line and listen to the latest and greatest in terms of what's happening with the bills, what's the administration's doing, what do we think the likelihood of certain outcomes, and so forth. And we love selling work like that, where you can do the work once and sell it multiple times. Sometimes consulting is do the work once, sell it once, and repeat. But that's the kind of a product that we really like, which is more of a subscription-based product.
All right, so this is a question for each one of you on the panel. What are some unique identifiers that make one of the best consultants for your specific company?
Besides being an Aggie?
I've got to say, being proactive and, as Angela said, passionate. I was in a meeting with, we're just planning an approach for a client, really short story. And one of the consultants in the room was on her computer pretty much the whole time we were talking, and I was slightly irritated, but she was also engaged. But after the hour-long discussion, I said, well, we had everything up on the board, and I said, well, who wants to write this up so we can go and start working on it, communicate? She said, I've already got it all written up. I'll just email it to you. So even though she knew nothing about it before you walked into the room, she was proactive, she took good notes, she really helped the rest of us get along by just taking, not taking charge, but taking charge of that little task. So I think being passionate, proactive, learn about where you're going. If you know you've got a new client coming up, or when you're interviewing, don't show up in an interview, and I know none of you would do this, and ask questions about what do you do. You should know the company, you should know their issues, you should know if they've had a recent acquisition, how that's going to impact this area that you're interviewing for. So do your homework and study and be prepared and be confident. You guys are really bright. You know a lot. Use that in your discussions.
I say listen to Kent. That maybe what you said would be the number one thing that I would have said too, about being passionate and engaged. And if I think you can be very successful in consulting if you want to give more and you want to get more out of it. And we've had all kinds at our company, and the kind that don't last are the kind that say, I like this job, but I kind of just want to take it slow, and I'm looking at my clock, my watch, and I want to leave 4:35. The kind of people that are intense and engaged and are looking for ways to make a difference, those people thrive, especially at a small company where there's a lot of things we haven't figured out about our own business. We just barely got a CRM. We just barely hired our first marketing person. Up until 2 years ago, we didn't even have an HR function, so we just were kind of making it up. So in a small or a mid-sized company, there's a ton of value that you can add if you just jump in and say, I want to give it all. I want to be intense while I'm here, and you'll get a ton back, and you'll add huge value. That's not for everybody. It's not comfortable and it's not easy, but it comes with great rewards.
I totally agree, and I would add one thing is humility with confidence. So I love that you mentioned confidence and passion and being proactive, but if you're arrogant, you just aren't going to go very far, and nobody's going to want to work with you. And I was talking to a company recently who said we have a no-jerk policy, and I love that. I think everyone should have a no-jerk policy. And I think humility and confidence go hand in hand, because you've got to do the work to be confident. You can't show up and be arrogant. Those are different things. But if you've done the work, you know what you're talking about, you've done the research, you've put your heart out on the line and paid the cost to know what you're doing, that's where confidence comes from. But then couple that with the humility to say, I don't have all the answers, teach me, or have an opportunity to take feedback. Feedback is huge. It's hard. It hurts every time. I'm super personal about when I get feedback, and I don't love it, but I appreciate it, and then I love it. It's kind of that process. So I would say, on top of that, definitely come to the table with humility. And I love what you said about being an Aggie. So quick aside, I'm not allowed to talk about the university down south because I married a Cache Valley boy. But I did start there, and when I came to Utah State, I loved Utah State. And when I went out into DC, I wasn't sure that I could compete. I feel like there are maintenance factors and defining factors. The defining factors are the confidence and humility. Maintenance, be smart, be capable, go and work hard. But I wasn't sure that that translated out of this community. And you know what? It absolutely does. No question. You can go out and be the very best in the world, not just the very best in Logan. And I found that. I was shocked by it. I was probably not confident enough to realize what an education here gave me, and the mentoring that I got here really prepared me to do out there. You know how to communicate. You know how to have relationships. You know how to work hard. You know how to work while going to school. Not very many people know how to do that. You know how to do a lot of things that a lot of people don't. And when you go somewhere else, where everyone else around you kind of takes that for granted, it won't be taken for granted when you go to New York or to DC or to San Francisco or down to Salt Lake and work in a creative agency. You are remarkable, and take that confidence with you, but then don't be a jerk about it.
Great. We'll take one more question. I saw a lot of hands a while ago, so nobody wants to be the last one, apparently. Okay, that works out great then. We want to go ahead and thank our guests. We have a couple gifts for you. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause and a big thank you.